All right, so we've talked about President Ford and President Carter's domestic policy. So really quick in this video, we will cover what it was like for their foreign policy. Now, our relationship with USSR is still everyone's top priority and is still the biggest worry when it comes to foreign policy during this time. So that's really what a lot of Ford's foreign policy is going to be wrapped up in. Jimmy Carter's going to get his hands into some other stuff, but we'll talk about Ford first. So Ford is going to do a lot of he's going to try to do a lot of good things to mend or at least calm down tensions with the USSR. One of the first things he'll do is sign something called the Helsinki Accords. And that is an agreement among major world leaders all over the world on our favor of human rights. So basically it's I guess you'd say an intergovernmental agreement on what human rights are and how citizens should be treated by their government. So this is a really progressive thing to do. There are countries all over the world, even today, that have problems with human rights violations. And it's always difficult to decide, where the United States fits into that. Do we allow it to happen? Do we put pressure on those governments? What do we do to try to help those people? Do we do nothing? So that's sort of what the Helsinki Accords was in an effort to try to do. The next thing he'll do is sign something called the SALT II. This was an agreement between us and the USSR to limit our nuclear weapons production. This is going to be a major bonus for Ford. This is a great thing that Ford does. At the peak of the arms race between us and the USSR, we together had enough nuclear weapons to blow up the entire planet over 200 times. That's insane. Nobody needs that many nuclear weapons. You blow up the planet one time, that's enough. You can only do it one time, much less 2 times, 3 times, or over 200 times. That's just insane. It's overkill, to say the least. So this is sort of it was an effort to sort of pull back that arms race between us and the USSR. Now, Ford also wants to try to put an end to all the drama after the Vietnam War. So in Cambodia from 1975 to 1979, a genocide of the Cambodian people began from the new communist regime that took over after we pulled out of Vietnam. And obviously there's plenty of people in the United States who thought we should get involved. No one ever wants to let a genocide take place. But people were still very much upset about our involvement in Vietnam and the toll that it took on our people and our economy. And it was just a very controversial decision. So ultimately, Ford decided not to step in. And unfortunately, a lot of atrocities were committed there, and a lot of people did die. In 1975, when South Vietnam fell to North Vietnam, thousands of Vietnamese people fled Vietnam to come to the United States. They left in these ratchet makeshift boats. We called them boat people. And this is going to last for over 20 years. It's the largest mass water migration in human history. And over that 20-year period, over 1 million South Vietnamese people will arrive in the United States via those boats. So today we even have a large Vietnamese American population in the United States because of this mass migration. So now let's talk about Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter's foreign policy was very different from Gerald Ford's, and he operated his in a very different way. He wanted to make his foreign policy more about human rights than it was about, global power or our relationship with the USSR. He really strayed away from paying attention to what was going on in the Cold War. He wants to make our relationship with other countries about how those countries treat their citizens. So this is going to do 2 things. Number one, it's going to put us back into that position of being the global police. We're mandating how other countries should treat their citizens is essentially what he wants to do. And then the second thing it's going to do is it's going to cause a setback on our relationship with the Soviet Union. After the Helsinki Accords and SALT II, we weren't in a relatively okay place, but telling the USSR what they can and can't do with their people is a very big deal because they have a very long history of human rights violations in Russia. So when we say that we're going to set out to, eradicate the world of these things, then we're targeting the USSR essentially. So this angers the USSR, and Jimmy Carter's really going to exacerbate that problem even more. He's actually going to withdraw from the SALT II agreement that we had gotten into with Gerald Ford. He's going to throw that out the window, and he's going to impose sanctions on the USSR because they ended up invading Afghanistan. So this is when all of our involvement in the Middle East truly begins. Obviously, we had involvement in the Middle East before. We had allies and we had enemies, but the position that the United States is currently in the Middle East begins here with the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. So Russia invaded Afghanistan to set up a communist puppet government. And so we're mad about that. We don't want to see communism expand. We don't want to see the Russian political power structure expand. So we withdraw from SALT II and we impose all these sanctions on the USSR. We also boycott the 1980 Summer Olympics because they were being held in Moscow. We refused to participate. It's the only time that's ever happened before. We are also going to find a rebel group in Afghanistan and supply them with weapons to resist the USSR and their influence in Afghanistan, and they were called the Mujahideen, but you don't need to write that down. I know you're probably thinking, oh my God, how do I spell Mujahideen? But all you should know is that group ultimately transformed into being the Taliban. So we did supply our future enemy with weapons. That is a problem for future us. For now, we're focusing on the USSR. And Jimmy Carter's thought process here, his view on human rights, is also going to have an impact on our relationship with countries other than the USSR. He's going to withdraw support from the dictatorship in Nicaragua, which allowed a rebellion to rise up and overthrow that government. It's going to strain our relationship with Cuba. Things are going to worsen once Jimmy Carter starts to do these things, and ultimately Castro is going to start to try to get back at him by announcing that any boat leaving Cuba, destined for the United States, has to take prisoners with them, and they have to be dumped in the United States. So he's using the U.S. as a dumping ground for actual criminals from Cuba. Obviously, we're not fans of that. And one of Jimmy Carter's most controversial decisions is in 1977. He drafts a plan to give Panama control back of the Panama Canal Zone by 1999. This went into effect in 1978. Now, why is this so controversial? And I know that we've talked before in class about how I'm very much against that decision. Ultimately, in terms of manpower, construction, and maintenance, the United States spent a total of $8.6 billion on the Panama Canal. That does not include what we spent on funding the Panamanian Revolution that we helped them fight in return for them even allowing us to rent this land. The Panama Canal today can make up to $12 million per day off tolls, and depending on the size of the boat, sometimes it might be a little less, sometimes it might be a little more. It depends on how many boats are coming in and what the size of the boats are, but about 12 million a day, and we gave it away for free. That's all I'm going to say about it. So other things that Jimmy Carter is really known for in terms of foreign policy, the first is the Camp David Accords. So here's the United States acting as the police again, sticking our nose into something that was going on between Egypt and Israel. Now, Egypt and Israel have pretty much been fighting since, this goes all the way back to Moses. If you are a Christian or have gone to Sunday school, church, vacation Bible school, whatever, and you've heard the story of Moses, Moses was Egyptian prince adopted by the pharaoh and his family. And the story goes that he abandoned his family to take his place among the Hebrew, who were his people, the Jewish people. And ultimately, he led the Hebrew slaves out of Egypt. Now, where did the Hebrew slaves settle? Who are the Hebrew slaves' descendants? But the Israeli people. So this tension and fighting between Israel and Egypt literally goes all the way back to Moses and Ramses. These are just the descendants of Ramses and the descendants of Moses. So they've been fighting since Israel was born into a country in 1948. So in 1977, Jimmy Carter decides that he himself will bring to an end this fighting that has been going on since Moses. So he invites the leaders of both Israel and Egypt to come to the United States to Camp David, which is the presidential vacation home, to work out some sort of an agreement. And ultimately, what these two leaders decide, you see them there standing there shaking hands with Jimmy Carter, and look at how happy Jimmy Carter is. He's just so proud of himself. So ultimately, what they come to an agreement on is that Egypt will recognize Israel as a country, and they will be the first Arab country to do so. In return, Israel will pull its troops out of the Sinai Peninsula, which was a portion of land that was, heavily coveted by both of these countries. Essentially, Israel is saying, I'll give it to you if you recognize us as a country. And this is a huge deal. This is a major moment in terms of peacemaking in the world. So the Israeli leader goes home and presents this to his people, and they are absolutely thrilled. The Israeli people are, this president is celebrated. They couldn't be happier. The Egyptian leader goes home, announces this to his people, and they are so furious that he is assassinated. So ultimately, what was seemingly a wonderful thing ended up in the assassination of the president of Egypt. It did not go well. Needless to say, Egypt and Israel don't necessarily have a very positive relationship today. And the last thing that we know Jimmy Carter for is something called the Iran hostage crisis. The United States had been supporting the government in place in Iran for quite some time. The title of the leader there was the Shah, S-H-A-H. Now, the Shah was a fairly corrupt man. He spent a lot of money on himself, didn't really help the people, and the hate for him was growing all the time. So there was a revolution in Iran where they were essentially about to overthrow this man, put him on trial for the crimes that he committed against the Iranian people, and he fled Iran. And he actually got really sick. So his supporters smuggle him out of the area, and Jimmy Carter in 1979 allowed him to come here to seek medical treatment. So the Iranian people are saying, give us back this man. I don't care that he has cancer. He's murdered people. He's destroyed our country, blah, blah, blah. We want to put him on trial. And ultimately, we want to kill him. We want to execute this man. And Jimmy Carter is like, no, he's sick. He has cancer. We're going to keep him. So the Iranian student radicals, it's a largely student-led revolution happening here in Iran. They freak out and they storm the U.S. embassy, which is located in Tehran in Iran, and they take 66 Americans hostage in that embassy. Jimmy Carter at that moment had no idea what to do, and this is really going to hurt his presidency. That was in 1979. They will remain hostages until 1981, when Ronald Reagan is able to get them back. They will not be released until 1981. They were beaten, some of them tortured. It was a really horrible situation. You see the picture of them standing there. So we've got Americans being held hostage for over a year, almost 2 years, just because of lack of leadership of Jimmy Carter. And this is going to be a big thing, along with the Camp David Accords and the Panama Canal, that is really going to mar Jimmy Carter's presidency.